Many thanks to the day sponsors today, Humber Zero. The event brought to you by Marketing Humber, alongside the event partners, the University of Hull, Yorkshire Water, Ørsted, Yorkshire Energy Park, and for this year, our COP26 partners, Zero Carbon Humber. Also, thank you to the Aura Innovation Centre and the University of Hull for hosting this event. My name is Jenny Sutcliffe. I will be hosting this morning. I'm the Principal Consultant Regulatory Affairs for Phillips 66, and I'm closely involved in the development of the Humber Zero project, which is sponsoring this day, the Energy Transition Day. In my opinion, everyone who works in the energy industry today should be proud of what they do. Energy is not just life-enhancing, it is in many ways, in many cases, life-giving. And the world is going to need more energy. We need the global transition to clean power to be at least 4 times faster than it is at present. The power sector accounts for 1/4 of global greenhouse gas emissions. As demand for energy grows, the power sector must grow and decarbonise in parallel. Dramatic cost reductions in solar and wind energy mean that renewables are now cheaper than coal in most parts of the world and bring benefits via improved air quality, energy access and security, and creating jobs in new industries. I'm privileged to host a fantastic and diverse range of speakers today. We have with us Emma Pinchbeck, the CEO of Energy UK, Ruth Herbert, the CEO of the Carbon Capture and Storage Association, Dave Peakston, Project Development Engineer for VPI Humber Zero, Clark McFarlane, CEO Onshore for Northern Europe and the Middle East, Siemens Gamesa, Emma Toulson from Ørsted UK, and Sophie Al-Mudalal, a PhD student here at the Aura Innovation Centre. Welcome to everybody who's joining us in person and also to those joining online. We would be happy to take any questions that you have in the chat or any comments in the online chat, in the online Q&A session. Each of our speakers will first be talking to you about their particular area of expertise. And then after all of them have spoken, we will be hosting a live Q&A session. Phillips 66 has been involved in the development of the Humber Zero project, as well as other decarbonisation initiatives, such as production of development fuels for lower carbon fuels, and the development of the Gigastat Project, which is a consortium between Ørsted, Phillips 66, ITM Power, and Element Energy. And what has really struck me about working in these collaborations is the diversity and the differences that we can bring and that we can really work together on. This is something that really gives me optimism that we can solve the climate change problem. And with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Do we have Emma online now? So Emma is going to be joining us online, but we haven't quite managed to get her yet. So our first speaker for today will be Ruth Herbert, the CEO of the Carbon Capture and Storage Association. Ruth has graduated with a Master in Physics and a speciality in Geophysics, and has 2 decades in the public sector designing and implementing electricity market reform for the Department for Energy and Climate Change, and has previously been working in the Low Carbon Contracts Company, which are the independent counterparty for the development of low carbon electricity and the contracts for difference to enable this electricity to develop. She now is the CEO for the Carbon Capture and Storage Association, and this is her 2nd day in the job. With that, I would like to hand the floor to Ruth.
Thanks very much. I'm going to walk about. I'll come down here. Yeah, 2nd day on the job and lots is happening already. So I had prepared some slides, but some of you may be aware there's been some announcements today. So as I go through my slides, I'll correct them as I go. So never a dull moment in CCUS at the moment. So just a little bit about the CCSA. We're the trade association promoting commercial deployment of carbon capture, utilisation and storage. And what we do really is advocate on policy developments that will kind of lead to a regulatory framework and incentive framework for CCUS. We also do a lot of raising awareness of CCS, basically its role in fighting climate change, but also kind of its role in delivering clean economic growth and the benefits that can bring. And we really focus on accelerating commercial scale projects because we believe that's the next stage for this important technology. And we really want to see all technologies, all kind of applications of CCUS come forward. It has potential to decarbonise industry, power, hydrogen, and sort of also to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere directly. So a little bit about the UK government's CCUS strategy. Really, almost a year ago now, the Prime Minister's 10-point plan was really the first place to set out an ambition on CCUS. Its ambition was that the UK should store about 10 million tonnes a year by 2030. And the government said that it would like to have 4 CCUS clusters operating by 2030, 2 by the mid-2020s and another 2 by 2030. So we'll talk about the clusters later. There has been an announcement today and I'll talk a little bit about that. So there was also an ambition for 5 gigawatts of hydrogen by 2030 and lots of sort of funding made available, the CCUS Infrastructure Fund and also the Net Zero Hydrogen Fund. So that was almost a year ago now, and it almost kind of feels like old news because since then the government's been doing a lot of work on business models for dispatchable power industry, also a little bit of work on potential options for hydrogen business models. So there's been an awful lot of work going on to say, well, how will these incentives actually be designed and how will they deliver this kind of level of rollout? And then obviously, a short time after the 10-point plan, we had the 6th carbon budget from the Committee on Climate Change. And they actually made advice to the government to adopt a 78% by 2035 emissions reduction target. And that has been legislated for. And that's a big game changer because, as the CCC said in their advice, CCS is a necessity now. It's not an option anymore. It's not a nice to have. We actually need this. We won't be able to meet this target without it. And as I said before, the focus for CCUS is clean hydrogen production, greenhouse gas removals, decarbonisation of heavy industry, and obviously flexible low carbon power. And today we're focusing on energy and the kind of agreement that they're looking for power is a dispatchable power agreement, something that makes a gas-fired power generating station dispatch after renewables, but before unabated gas. So it would actually price this asset in the market so that it generates and is a clean, flexible source of power for the market when the wind isn't blowing. The other really important thing about what the Climate Change Committee said was in their balanced net zero pathway, they said, actually, we're going to need 22 million tonnes of CO2 stored by 2030, which is a bit different to the 10 million tonnes that had been in the Prime Minister's 10-point plan earlier. Now, obviously, this isn't just something that the UK needs. Globally, we need action on CCUS. And the IEA has set out its own net zero by 2050 roadmap, and that looks globally. And you can see there that CCUS has a huge role to play in many, many aspects of the economy, the global economy, very similar to how it would play a role in the UK, whether it's clean fuel, decarbonisation of industry, CCUS with bioenergy. So really, really important role. What does that mean for the UK? Well, it means that because we have already geological assets, such as offshore storage sites, the skills and industry already around that offshore infrastructure, we're really, really well placed to take advantage of what will be, as the IA said, a global industry. So we can be leaders in this technology if we move first. We could capture a significant share of this global market, and actually BEIS themselves have estimated that potentially we could get 4.3 billion gross value added a year from exports by 2050. And this is, I think, really a combination of two things, both exporting the technology and skills that we have, but also potentially storing CO2 from other countries, as we do have about a third of the storage capacity in Europe within the UK continental shelf. So a massive opportunity, and lots of regions around the UK have recognised this. And really crucially, I think, for the government's sort of levelling up agenda as well, is these are industrial heartlands where, you know, if we don't actually clean up some of the activities there, those jobs could be at risk in the future. And this is something that is really, really important, is the jobs that can come from this investment. And actually the CCSA did a study on this, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But today we've had an announcement from the government around the clusters. They have confirmed that 2 clusters will go forward. Those clusters are HyNet and the East Coast cluster. And just to be clear, that's the endurance storage site and the Teesside and Humber clusters that connect to that. So we have Northwest and Northeast will be going forward. Now, obviously, other clusters are going to be disappointed. The CCSA has made very, very clear to the government that, you know, if we are going to have 4 operational by 2030, or maybe even more, if we are to meet the Climate Change Committee's trajectory of 22 million tonnes a year stored, or even more than that by 2030, then we are going to need to get cracking with other sites pretty quickly, pretty swiftly, following on from the first ones. But it's a really, really positive, I think, decision to move ahead quicker than we were expecting the announcement, because I think it's going to be next week or alongside the budget. So we have this confirmation that 2 will be moving forward immediately. And discussions will carry on with the others. And there has also been a decision that the Scottish cluster is a reserve cluster should there be any problems with HyNet or East Coast cluster. So they have been obviously deemed as being ready as well, and will stand in waiting there. So how quickly can we move with the next phase has not been set out yet, but I think it's really good to have some early news on this, and great for this region. And I know that we'll be talking about the impacts of it on the panel. So yeah, news, always good. Something's going forward, and there is huge potential on the back of that, I think, to build an industry here in the UK. So this slide's out of date, because we've had the announcement this morning. So we did a study in the CCSA just to really help the Treasury ahead of the budget. We know there's going to be the spending review announcement, potentially, I think it's next week. And we did a study to sort of say, look, investing in CCUS is actually really good economic sense. Not only can it help us meet our climate change targets, but actually it can also have a hugely positive economic impact for the UK. We looked at an investment of 2.6 billion a year to meet the Climate Change Committee's net zero pathway. We found that could create 10,000 highly skilled new jobs in clean economic growth, and also safeguard 50,000 jobs that would be at risk otherwise. So that was a really important kind of cost benefit analysis, and we have actually been calling on the Treasury to set out, similarly to what they did in the early days of development of offshore wind, to set out, and renewable energy, to set out a clear annual budget for CCUS, maybe out to 2030, that really gives investors, project developers, and the supply chain the confidence to kind of make their own investments in this sector. So that's what we've been pushing for. We're obviously waiting for more detail on the back of today's announcement about the timelines and, if you like, the delivery plan for CCUS going forward, not just for the first clusters, but the projects within those clusters and the follow-on track 2 clusters. So let's have a budget, let's have it clearly set out and accounted for, not just for the 3-year spending review period, but up to 2030, because these are long-term strategic decisions, and we want people to come and invest in the UK and invest on this technology. So, I mean, summary really is, you know, we had the 10-point plan, seems a bit long ago now. We then had the 6 carbon budget with more ambition needed. We've had the announcement of 2 clusters, which is great, but we really need to keep the momentum and understand now what happens, the timeline for the projects within those clusters and the timeline for track 2 clusters as soon as possible. And if all of that could be backed up with a clear budget over the next 10 years, then we would be able to get on and deliver this and make the UK the #1 destination for CCUS and start to really realise those export opportunities that we talked about earlier. So hopefully that was a good summary, and look forward to answering questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ruth. That was a really great presentation, really interesting. I think, I mean, something perhaps you could just clarify for those in the room who are kind of hearing carbon capture and storage and clusters and announcements. Perhaps could you just explain, sort of in really simple terms, what the government 10-point plan wanted and what that announcement means in relation to that today?
Yeah, so I mean, the 10-point plan, as I said, had this sort of target for 10 million tonnes of CO2 stored by 2030. I think what's been announced today, and their assumption was that would probably mean that they would need 4 clusters operational by 2030, but that they would want to get 2 operational by the mid-20s. What's been announced is 2 clusters that will be moving forward. Now, when you say by the mid-20s, obviously that's very soon, because these things take a while to develop, but presumably those clusters are confident of being operational within the timescales. That was part of the application process. So assuming that those the transport and storage infrastructure can move forward on that timetable, and it is aggressive, and there are still regulatory policy and regulatory issues being worked through. So it's you know, that the investment, I guess, criteria are not 100% clear, because there is still work going on with Health and Safety Executive, with the economic regulator on the regulated asset-based model. So, I mean, it gets complicated very quickly, but in simple terms, there's some policy and regulatory decisions still need to be made that then creates the certainty for the transport and storage part. That's the pipeline, obviously, and the offshore storage sites to be developed in time for that kind of mid-20s goal. What still needs to be made clear and hasn't yet is sort of the timeline then for the projects that can connect to that transport and storage cluster, when they will be decided. And obviously, I talked a bit about the business models for things like dispatchable power, hydrogen, and heavy industry capture from heavy industry. Those are being developed, but they're not final yet. So again, lots and lots of sort of policy and regulatory work needing to be done so that the terms, if you like, of those agreements by which these projects will be funded are made clear. So it's by no means they've been announced today. They're going to start, they're going to be able to sort of be ready on time. I think a lot still lies with the government and the industry, obviously, to work through these details. But I guess you'll hear from others about how the funding I mentioned on my first slide, which was announced under the 10-point plan, has actually enabled projects to move forward with their investigative studies and the detailed design work, even whilst, if you like, we are still negotiating and working on the details of how the actual build will be funded.
That's great. There are so many moving parts to this, and we could talk about it all day. But also to emphasise, the announcement today is such a positive thing for this region. There's going to be the development of carbon capture and storage, ultimately to contribute to achieving net zero. So thank you. Thank you, Ruth. So we're going to move on to our next speaker now. I think we have got Emma online. Oh, no, we've lost Emma again. Okay. Oh, dear. We will come back to Emma. So our next speaker then is Dave Theakston. Dave is the project development engineer for the VPI Humber Zero carbon capture project. I have the pleasure of working with Dave closely on this project. And Dave is one of those people that appears to know everything about electricity infrastructure. and yes, he has multiple experience in locations throughout the power sector for the last 25 years. And he's going to talk to you about the Humber Zero project.
Thank you, Jenny. Thanks, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking again at the Waterline event. I actually spoke last time in 2019 about the Humber Zero project. So it's good to see that it's progressed to where it is today. It's a fantastic achievement. So if I just move to the opening slide. So in summary, the Humber Zero project, it's a partnership between Phillips 66, Vitol VPI Immingham, which is the large-scale CHP on the south bank of the Humber, and also working alongside the transportation and storage company Harbour Energy, which are looking at the development of offshore CO2 storage and onshore pipelines. So to hit some of the big numbers, 8 million tonnes of CO2 annually captured and stored, £1.2 billion committed funds to date, and up to 1 million homes to be powered by hydrogen. So, sorry, that hydrogen produced to be able to repower 1 million homes. So, significant amount of infrastructure there. The hydrogen would be a mixture of blue and green hydrogen as part of the overall Humber Zero concept. But what that also means is, job creation for the region, potentially 200 permanent jobs, 2,500 jobs during construction, and then also the additive effect of, the local economy and boosting and safeguarding up to over 20,000 jobs in the region. So why it matters, I don't think I need to tell everybody that, the Humber is a great industrial area, energy intensive industries, that 1 in 10 jobs in the Humber region. It's 20% of the Humber's economy as well. I mean, you only have to, drive down the A63 or the M180, and you can just see the amount of industry that's down those channels. So it's easy to understand why. Also, it's 40% of the UK's industrial emissions. Now, we talk about this, Jenny and I, saying, people say it's the biggest CO2 emitter. It's just the biggest industrial cluster in the UK. That's why it holds that volume of CO2. And also, Ruth nicely said about all the government policies and the goal to reach 2050. So it's a legal requirement. So it's a fantastic project to be progressing. So, my favourite bit into the detail. So what's it about? Initially, so it's 8 million tonnes in total for the overall project. But initially, the first phase of the project is to capture the CO2 from the flue gases in the existing facilities. So that's the VPI Immingham site, and also a processing facility on the Phillips 66, the Phillips 66 complex. The stacks would be retrofitted to basically capture the CO2 using an amine or solvent-based technology. That CO2 that's captured would be cleaned and sampled, and basically put to a specification that is suitable for then being admitted into a transportation and storage network. So it has to be really pure, really clean, and no moisture, which is a key element of it. And then one of the key points is it then needs to be compressed up to significantly high pressure, so about 135 bar, and then taken in pipelines away from the facility to an offshore store. And the one that we've been targeting is off the coast of Thettlethorpe, and it's approximately 140 kilometres offshore, and it's a redundant an ex-gas field that's been used. There, the CO2 will be stored safely and permanently about 9,000 feet down. So, yeah, significant depth under the North Sea. And last week, the Harbour Energy were given a licence for that to basically take place. So they're allowed to be able to store quantities of CO2 under the North Sea in the redundant gas fields, which is great news for those guys. So, location, I don't think I need to explain to everyone in the room. We're sat in the Humber. You can see the site of the Humber Zero, and then what we benefit from is access to the offshore storage locations, and that's whether that be saline aquifers or depleted gas and oil fields that can be reused. We'd be supporting the Humber to achieve the 2040 targets, and also creating a specialist hub in this region for the high skilled, high volume of jobs. It would then establish Humber as a global model for the low carbon industry. And the key thing is developing the skills for the future in the energy transition. And maintain the Humber as a UK powerhouse. So I think everybody would agree with that. So as a short video, if I just click it, will it go? There we go. So to summarise, I suppose where we're at now. So I mentioned that I spoke at the Waterline in 2019 about this project, and at that time it was very it was in the very early stages of concept. And, it's great that, Humber Zero in March 2021 received the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund for 12.5 million. So that's a 50% share. So the companies of VPI and of P66 are both vested. Have investing time and money into this. As Jenny said, we're working really closely as a team together on this. And actually, some of the key dates were right here, right now. We're doing the technology selection, so that's looking at the technology for actually retrofitting the flues at the refinery and at the CHP to capture the CO2. Alongside that, we're also developing the feed scope of work, and actually we're going through the feed evaluations for the VPI side. We've kicked off all the environmental planning and permitting work, which is a big piece of work for this project, with the aim to starting construction towards the end of 2023. And I think back to Ruth's point, saying in the 2020s, it's here, it's now, we've got to move quickly now to basically hit these targets. And the idea is, the potential for the project to be online capturing CO2 by late 2026, early 2027. So it really is an aggressive timeline, and there's a lot of work to go to get us there. So thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. And that's it. All right.
Thank you very much, Dave, for that summary of Humber Zero. We're going to go to our next speaker now. Dare I ask, is Emma available? Yeah, its page isn't even there to see. We're going to move on. I think we're struggling to get Emma. Do we have Clark? No.
Yes, he's on the screen.
He's on the screen, though. Thank you. I knew it was a bad idea to have the screen behind me. That's fine. So our next speaker is Clark McFarlane. He is the CEO for Onshore, Northern Europe and the Middle East for Siemens Gamesa. And I will hand over the virtual platform to Clark.
Hi there. Hopefully you can hear me and you see me on the screen. I'm sorry I can't be with you today. It's always good to visit the Humber. But what I'd like to do is talk to you about what it means for the supply chain energy transition. Where's the opportunities, the challenges, and quite often asked, where are the jobs that are going to be created? So maybe if you could show my slides, that would be helpful. So next slide, please. Now, don't get alarmed. This is not Paris after the effects of climate change. This is not going to happen to Glasgow after it does COP26. This is our transition that we've had over the last 30 years. And if you look at the left-hand side, then you will see the turbine that we put into the water, the very first offshore turbine in Denmark, in Vindby. And then you'll see I've been very fair to our competitors here in Siemens Gamesa. I've put the three latest turbines in the middle next to the Eiffel Tower. Why have I done that? Because energy transition isn't just something we started. It is something we're continuing. And as our previous speakers have said, something we need to accelerate. But we accelerate from a good base. Now, what did energy transition mean for us in the past to get from that small turbine to the large turbine? Well, it meant a lot of technology, a lot of people to be inducted, trained, user expertise, bring it from other industries in order that we could have the turbine that we've got today. When the turbines grow, you've got something called the square cube law. So we need to increase the surface area, so in the square footage or square meter of a blade, but in doing that, you create an extra cube, and an extra cube creates extra weight. And therefore, the technology has very much been about reducing the weight, taking out gearboxes, moving components, keeping the blades lighter, using special materials. And then it's about taking out components. So get fewer cables, fewer lifts, specialist materials, in order that we can transport things from manufacturing without it having to be lifted, or it uses the same transportation cradle in order to be reused. So when people just say energy transition is about a product, maybe it's a bigger turbine, whether we put hydrogen on it, whether we're then taking off the CO2, as we talked about earlier, what I would say, it's about working as a team. And it's only as working as a team will we be able to create and maintain both the momentum and the jobs required to make it happen. Next slide, please. This slide is, for me, our energy transition in a single slide. What are the challenges to us? Well, if I start on the top left, we will go from the fairly shallow waters that we've had in the North Sea or off the west coast, and we need to go into deeper waters. And that brings all sorts of environmental challenges, not just getting there, staying there, being safe, having the communications, having the logistics, and being able to keep in touch. If you can imagine your broadband working to pick up this online virtual element, try working 100 kilometers in the middle of the sea and trying to get a connection in terms of your data. There's a challenge. Then you've got a technical solution. So we don't want the turbines to stop. We want them to run. We want them to monitor remotely. We want to service them as cheaply and simply as possible. And so therefore, on the right-hand side, you can see drones used for inspection techniques, and you can use vessels, and we hope to use them on multiple wind farms, not rather than just one wind farm, to bring down the elements of it. So if you're a drone pilot, or if you're someone who's got good lenses or can analyze data, or if you're good on a vessel in any of those aspects, as well as a technician, then you're welcome to our industry. Then in the middle, I've put people. One of the things we're asking people to do in the middle there is somebody coming out of a helicopter. So if you took somebody from a construction industry, for example, and you said, you're going to jump out of a helicopter to work, what do you think their attitude to that would be? So we must make sure that we do that safely, properly, and with the elements of training required, and make sure we keep up that every day. And in the middle, there is a set of employees. Those tens of thousands of jobs need to be found, trained, and need to be diverse. So let's talk about the finding and training. So we have a training centre in Hull as part of our organisation there. 60% of that, plus 60% of it, is not for Siemens Gamesa employees, it's for the rest of the industry, because there's a significant training challenge. And in that training challenge, we need to get an industry that looks and feels like it's in energy transition. That means more gender balance, and that means more BAME people in the industry. Now, the good thing is, for us within Siemens Gamesa, we have a negative gender pay gap. So when we can get females into our industry, they can have a good career. We just haven't got enough in. And I think a good company under an energy just transition looks modern, looks youthful, looks diverse. So there's a challenge for us. And then in the bottom left-hand side, if we're going to have a lot of new people in the industry, it needs to be a safe industry. And so a lot of our technology has been about using people who are good at risk assessment, who are good at looking at techniques of keeping people, whether it be ergonomics or human factors. How can we design a system that works with people who are unfamiliar with the product or unfamiliar with the surroundings? So it's not just about training, it's about designing out the risk. The final one there is the difference between an AC and an HVDC in terms of the technology. So there's energy transition for us in a slide and how it impacts people. Next slide. What does it mean for the supply chain and indeed for us in the Humber? Well, this is a picture of what we're going to complete with our new investment in the north of the Humber. So the building on the top right, so if I go from top right to bottom left, you'll see 2.5 buildings. The top building is over 250 meters long, just if you want to put a scale. That is our existing building, which we built for the 75-meter long blades. The 2.5 buildings is what we will finish at the end of next year in order to make 100-meter long blades. What does that matter? Well, that matters because we've got a construction company, a British construction company, building that project, and that creates jobs. It also brings jobs to the region, whether you're a hotel, taxi driver, news agent, providing lunch, whatever. There are a lot of infrastructure jobs to be created while we're building it. Then we will create 200 additional jobs in addition to the 1,000 we've already got on site, and that will involve recruitment, training, assessment, as well as the manufacturing jobs. And they come with procurement jobs, quality jobs. And so it's a range of skills that we need. So when you're thinking of coming into this industry, don't just think you're going to have to do something with your hands. We need a whole range of activities within the industry. And this is where the sector deal was very vital for us. It's not only getting the ambitions that everybody's been talking about, whether that be gigawatts or whether it be CO2 reduction, but it's about getting the supply chain. And thankfully, we've had the Port Infrastructure Fund, we've had the Offshore Wind Manufacturing Investment Scheme, very much backed up by government in order to create multiple elements and multiple examples of this facility. Next slide. But part of energy transition is not only what we do, it's how we do it. And I talked about being a company or an industry that wants to reflect society. Well, society wants us to be a sustainable industry. And what we've done is we've got a turbine, which is 85% recyclable, but 85%, not 100%. Yes, but the time you built a wind farm, you get the CO2 back within a year. So you get another 20, 25 years life of CO2 free. But we need to be able to think about what happens when we decommission these wind farms. Because 2050, I hate to tell you this, we haven't started yet. So nothing we built yet will be here in 2050. So when we talk about an energy transition and we think of 2050, we have it all to do. This was just the start. This was learning how to do it. And one of the things we must make sure is that everything we put in the ground or in the air or floating by 2050, we can sustainably remove and it won't impact the environment. Then the next slide. Opportunity. Opportunity. It's all right having the North Sea, but a lot of the globe needs floating. Now, at the moment, we need deep ports because that's the technology we've got. But we've brought down the cost of a wind farm from a fixed base quite considerably over the last 8 years. In fact, we've done it twice as fast as we thought we would do it. Now our challenge is to develop the technologies so it doesn't just need just the deep ports, and we can have a technology that spreads jobs around Scotland and around different areas of the globe, including Asia, in order everybody can get that renewable energy. We can take a lead on that. And indeed, we've already got an operating commercial offshore wind farm in Scotland as an example of what can be done. So I think that we need to look at the opportunities that are out there and make sure that we get that export and we get that expertise like we've done in oil and gas. And then my final slide is, and I think we'll talk about that, we already mentioned it, hydrogen. Our business has to change. But then again, it needs a turbine, and it needs a different type of turbine. It needs a turbine that produces hydrogen. What we've shown here is an example of a demonstrator plant that we're building. We have an onshore one in Denmark, and probably hydrogen we'll do two tracks. We'll see existing wind farms, probably starting onshore, and new wind farms created with hydrogen. And we desperately need that as part of a full energy transition. And I don't need to go into the details of why we need hydrogen now. But that requires a whole set of new partnerships. When I talked about the first one with the 3 turbines on it, today's turbines, all of the partnership that went in to creating the components, taking the weight out, doing the transportation systems, we'll need to work in partnership in order to make the hydrogen element of energy transition works. And that partnership is really only just starting. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Clark. I really enjoyed that. I thought you quite neatly highlighted some of the technical issues there are with actually deploying these technologies and scaling them up. And also how you really put it in the context of the opportunities that are available to people and for the region in the energy transition. So thank you. Moving on now, we will go on to Emma Toulson. Emma is the lead stakeholder relations advisor for Ørsted UK. She is a graduate and postgraduate of the University of Hull. So very pleased to have her back
A while ago.
now. Has previously worked for a large engineering company, been involved in the economic development of the Humber LEP, and now working for Ørsted UK in stakeholder relations.
Thank you. When you signed up to this session, you might have been expecting to see my manager, Jane Cooper, speaking today. Unfortunately, she hasn't been able to attend today, so you're left with me, and I hope I can do the session justice as Jane would have done. So yeah, I'm Emma. I'm lead stakeholder advisor for Ørsted in the UK. My base office is actually Grimsby, and I've promised Diana, although she's not in the room, that I wouldn't talk too much about offshore wind, because that's what everyone knows Ørsted for. And I really want to talk to you really about renewable hydrogen or green hydrogen, which I know is being kind of acknowledged in some of the previous presentations, as have some of the ideas that I was just going to pull out in my presentation. So I'll try and not repeat too much what's come before. So today I really just want to talk about renewable. I tend to talk about it as renewable hydrogen. It also gets referred to as green hydrogen. I'll explain what it is, so it's nice and clear for everyone. But I just really want to talk about it in the context of, I guess, our business at Ørsted as a sort of next logical step on the journey, as we've done lots in the offshore wind area, much like Clark said. It's looking at it as a next logical step for our business, but particularly why the Humber is a really fantastic place to explore renewable or green hydrogen as well. So I'll try and skip through these slides quite quickly just to give that overview. So I won't labour the point, but Ørsted's vision is to create a world that runs on green energy. We've been working on that vision for the last sort of just over a decade. We're ranked as one of the world's most sustainable energy companies, and I'm not going to go too much into detail on these slides, but these slides really just show that energy transition that Ørsted's been on in the last I don't know, 15-ish years. So you can see there a real dramatic reduction in our carbon emissions. You can see a real increase in our renewable energy sort of asset base. So we were very much a conventional power generation company, and you can see that real change to a renewables based company. And you can also see our global footprint, which has grown from a very Danish centre to a much more global footprint. And when you see what that looks like on the ground or across the globe, what you can see is the UK is our largest market as far as how many wind turbines are deployed in UK waters and what we've yet to build. You can also see quite a scattering of wind farms sort of in Europe. But as we have managed to bring the cost of offshore wind down, and as the globe has woken up to the climate change issue, then you can see that the global footprint for offshore wind is growing. And Diana, that's probably all I'm going to say about offshore wind, I think. So we're coming off the back of, over the last number of years, I know Clark mentioned Vindeby wind farm, which was back in 94. It's just been decommissioned. So in the last 20 or so years, we've taken offshore wind from quite a small industry, quite an expensive way to generate power, to now a way of generating power that is cheaper than most other ways of generating power. So it's a real viable and increasing source of power. And we've heard about the 10-point plan, and within there, there is the ambition for 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. We know we need to get to net zero by 2050, and that's legally binding. So there's all of these kind of things behind this to say, right, we're going to keep on this green journey. Now, at the moment, we've got about 11 gigawatts of offshore wind deployed around the UK. So when we talk about 40 gigawatts by 2030, that's like nearly a fourfold increase in less than a decade now. We're in 2021. So it's hugely ambitious. And we can use that electricity when it's being generated. We can use that electricity, and the most efficient way to use that electricity is literally just to use it as electricity. And we use it in electric vehicles, or more electric vehicles, or electric heat pumps, etc., and things like that. We can use it, and direct electrification is the most efficient way. But what this slide just shows is there are some industries, or let's say sectors, which are very, very difficult. I'll stop slightly short of saying impossible, but very, very difficult to directly electrify. And those kind of sectors are things like industry. It's also sort of heavy, long-ranging transport. So like EVs, as far as cars go, that might be the most efficient way to convert that energy into movement in a car. But when you've got big lorries or vessels or whatever that need to go a long way, they're very heavy to start with. You just think of the size of the batteries you'd need to put in there. So we've got to look at transport, and also heat is a kind of challenge as well, how to decarbonise heat. So what we're looking at is the potential of using that electricity generated by wind, putting that through essentially a process of electrolysis where you're splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen, and then you have a renewable molecule, hydrogen, which then can go into some of these sectors and thus decarbonise them. So it becomes a kind of renewable fuel. So when we look at something like industry, you look at the industry around the Humber, many of these industries already have a hydrogen demand, but at the moment are sourcing that hydrogen from fossil fuel sources. And so if we can replace that hydrogen using those processes where there's already demand with renewable hydrogen, then we're ultimately decarbonising those processes. And so I just want to talk about the Humber and why this is a good place to do it. And sorry if I'm teaching you to suck eggs, but it's just to kind of, realise that we're in such a good spot for actually trying to make this work. So we've talked about there's a demand from government and the climate that we decarbonise. We've talked about in the Humber, for us, we think it's a fabulous place for offshore wind. We've already demonstrated that over the years. Clark talked about it. We talked about it. There's lots of other activity around the region. I'll come back to that in the end for offshore wind. And I just want to sort of pull out a few case studies to show really why the Humber is a great place to explore this green hydrogen opportunity, and some of the sort of live projects with some of the partners in the room, those. So I start with a Danish case study. Sorry about this, but this is one that's been announced already. And I just want to sort of, so this is one of the projects we're involved with. It's a renewable hydrogen e-fueling facility. It's going to be built out in a number of phases there. Quite early as well, starting 2023 with 20 megawatts. And what I just want to draw your attention to, because I haven't got loads of time, but can you see there all the different logos that are underneath that image? So yes, we're a partner in there, but what you'll also see there is airports, shipping companies, transport companies, etc. And so when I look at that case study and I think, this idea of clustering as having the demand, the supply, the customer, how do you make this work together? I look at these different aspects and think about the transport aspects. And I think, the Humber's the biggest ports complex, the airport in the Humber, the the production potential, etc. And I think that this could be, it's really just sort of demonstrating that we need to work together to be able to make this move forward. And then the Gigastat project, which has been alluded to before. So this again, it shows this sort of collaboration. No one of these companies could do it on their own. So this is a collaboration between ITM Power, who are the electrolyzer designer manufacturer, so the technology provider, ourselves as the production of the electricity and project development, Phillips 66 oil refinery on the South Bank, and Element Energy is a kind of project manager and consultant in there. And so what we're looking at here for the first time is how can we, where we've got a large carbon emissions bubble over the Humber, because we've got all this very heavy industry that's producing more carbon in this area than anywhere else in the UK. And then we've got a whole bunch of wind farms just offshore. How can we couple these things together to actually drive that decarbonisation? I'd argue it's one of the best spots to do this. I think it's fantastic. So the Gigastat project, some of the things that we struggle with renewable hydrogen at the moment is, for instance, the scale of the technology, the cost, the regulatory environment for doing all of this kind of stuff. And so what the Gigastat project has done, because it will be reporting really soon, so keep your eyes open on when the public report becomes live, is to look at a kind of quite tangible case study. So you've got our Hornsea 2 offshore wind farm out in the southern North Sea, producing power that comes back to a substation in South Killingholme on the South Bank. Then that electricity would go into an electrolyzer. We've also looked at where the water comes from to be split. And then we've looked into how then that clean hydrogen coming from the electrolyzer could be fed into the Phillips 66 refining process. And so it's a feed study at this point in time, but what it's allowed us to do is tangibly kind of look at what could it look like and really assess what the challenges we need to overcome, how much is it going to cost us, how we're going to be able to actually make this work. So that project has been going for about a year and a half. I'm just looking at one of our audience members, and we're due to be, there will be a sort of public report coming quite soon on that, and you'll see some comms around that fairly soon. I wouldn't like to put a date on it just, but very soon. So I would encourage you to keep your eyes open at that. And do go to gigastat.co.uk to learn more about the project and latest news. And then this is just the last, it might actually be the second to last slide I'm going to show you. This is just another example of another project that, again, this is the sort of first toes in the water, no pun intended, with these kind of projects. So with Gigastat, we're very much looking at the potential for onshore production of hydrogen. So your electrolyzers and stuff would be onshore. With our Oyster project, so this is a project we've just received funding for. Again, you can see quite a plethora, including Siemens Gamesa this time. Of organisations, again, that sort of collaboration approach or collaborative approach. And in this instance, what we're looking at is the potential for producing hydrogen offshore, so i.e. at the turbine, and then you would pipe the hydrogen from there, maybe back to shore. So that's really early stage. We've only just started this project. But the fun thing is as well, because you don't really want to test offshore technology offshore if you can help it, because it's quite expensive and a bit inaccessible, we're actually going to be demonstrating this at Grimsby. So that's another good tick in the book for the Humber. And then I'm just going to plug another event we've got later, but also in the context of renewable hydrogen. I thought it was quite a creative thing to do. So as I say, obviously we're best known for offshore wind, and as Clark said, the sector deal. We talk about clusters in an offshore wind context. And in the Humber, we've been bringing together a lot of different stakeholders in order to, from that massive expansion in offshore wind, be able to grow and get the best out of it for the Humber. And so what that means is coming together around things like the supply chain, the sort of employment of skills, the innovation, all that sort of required to get us from that sort of where we are today to that 40 gigawatts by 2030. We've done quite a lot of work around offshore wind clusters, and the whole point is to get the best benefit from this new industry growing up. And I just want to kind of, I guess, leave you with a thought that, something like green hydrogen or other forms of hydrogen or CCS. This kind of works, this kind of clustering together, you know, bringing together the supply chain, the people, the innovation, the infrastructure. And that's what the Humber's been really good at. And that's, you know, why we've seen such a large opportunity and value created by the offshore wind industry. And so I guess in the front, I'm just sort of seeding this as an idea, as this is the kind of new stuff in town, kind of moving forward, that we should really look at this in a very sort of holistic way and think about those different sort of areas and make sure we've got the right skills in the future to deliver this, to make sure we're at the front of the innovation in this to make it happen, and make sure that we're building up that supply chain, which will provide the employment investment for the future. So that's my leaving thought. We are actually going to do a session later on today. It's a virtual session on the Humber offshore wind cluster. So if you're interested, do feel free to sign up using the Waterline hub. You can sit in your comfy chair at home to watch that. But that's going to be very much a 1 year on event from publishing the prospectus with all the partners last year to show the success that we've had in the last year from that. And that's it. Thank you for listening. I'll go sit down.
Thank you very much, Emma. Again, really enjoyed the touch there on the potential hydrogen economy, what's needed on that front. And again, you can see the themes of collaboration and diversity and different industries coming together. We'll move, have we got Emma?
I'm afraid Emma's been called away.
Okay, we're not going to get Emma today. Oh. Never mind. We will move on to Sophie Al-Mudalal, who is a PhD student here at the Aura Innovation Centre. Sophie did her undergraduate in marine biology and has been interested in climate change, doing a dissertation for her undergrad in that topic, particularly in the human impacts of climate change. And I shall give the floor over to Sophie.
Thank you. I'll just run over here. So go to my slides. So hello everyone, my name is Sophie, and as Jenny was saying, I'm a PhD student in the Aura Centre for Doctoral Training here in Hull. I just want to say thank you for having me here today. It's really exciting to be here in this event and on this panel with all of these speakers. So my presentation will be a bit different to the previous ones. Obviously my role in offshore wind is a little bit different, and so I'm just going to do a bit of a short intro about myself and how I got here today and my journey to Aura CDT. So I've always had a massive passion for the environment and an undergrad degree in marine biology, but I took a bit of a roundabout way of getting here. So I actually struggled with my A-levels and was a bit unsure of what to do. So I moved to had some time out from studies and went to Greece to volunteer in a turtle conservation company. And that was an amazing experience and made me realise that I do actually want to study a degree and come to university. So the following year I got accepted to Hull University here for my undergraduate degree. And then throughout the degree, my interest for human impacts and climate change were increased, with that being a common theme throughout the degree. And then as the opportunity of Aura arose for me, it was kind of the perfect pathway into an industry that really interested me. So that's when I applied to Aura CDT for a PhD position. And I'm now obviously doing my research here in Hull. So my role in the future of offshore wind. So obviously I've joined Aura CDT, and my actual research is looking into how human impacts have the impact on marine life. So offshore wind is wonderful, and the advancements are really exciting, but it's really important to balance that that advancement in reduction of carbon with protection for the environment as well. So these are the three main goals that I would love to accomplish in my role in the future of offshore wind. So first and foremost, complete my research, which specifically covers how the noise that's generated from offshore wind, so for example, installation, operation, decommissioning eventually, how that might impact marine invertebrates in the seabed. And if it does, how can we possibly mitigate that in the future? So as many speakers have mentioned before, the speed at which offshore wind is being developed and how big turbines are now, that increases the kind of deterioration in the environment. So I think it's a really important aspect to question whether there are any mitigation things that we can do to prevent the impacts that could be seen. So this also leads on to collaboration. Collaboration is a massive thing that's really important in offshore wind, as everyone has said. And it's a really important thing in Aura CDT as well. So there's lots of different disciplines that have been brought together for the research and kind of learning from each other as we go. So collaboration and the knowledge exchange between other researchers, as well as between us and the industries. So that's a massive aim for the future as well. And then lastly, hopefully my eventual career will allow me to play a future role in ensuring the development of this really important sector, to help meet our targets of decarbonisation and net zero, but also to promote awareness of the impacts that it might have in the future, and to balance that protection of the environment with decarbonisation, and hopefully transition to clean energy in the near future. So yeah, that's all from me, a bit short, but thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Sophie. That was a really good summary of your journey into this area. And I think it shows really the kind of diversity of routes that you could take to be part of this energy transition. And maybe science or engineering, engineering really is not your thing, but if biodiversity, marine biology is your interest, there's also a significant role for that in being able to manage the new industrial developments, but also biodiversity is, of course, one of the key things that we have to be able to combat climate change. So that was really good. So I think that's all of our speakers, except for, of course, Emma, who couldn't join in the end, which means that we're moving on to our Q&A session. I'm just aware that we are slightly over time. How long have we got for Q&A, Diane? 20 minutes, brilliant. Thank you to our in-person audience, and thank you to our online audience for staying with us. We could talk for all day on the energy transition and still wouldn't cover it, so appreciate there is a lot of information that we've given you there. We've given you a broad range of topics, so hopefully you have some questions for us. Before we jump into them, can I ask first of all for another round of applause for our panel and for our online speaker, Clark. They've done a fantastic job. And I'll open it up to the room first. If you have online questions, and please type them in, Diane will field them into the panel. Any questions from the room?
Good morning. Thank you very much for the very interesting presentations. My name's Mark Clune from Air Products. So a question for Dave on the Humber Zero. You talk about capturing 8 million tonnes a year of CO2. How much of that will come from the existing emissions from both VPI and Phillips 66?
So the current output of emissions from Phillips and VPI combined is around 5 to 6 million tonnes. So probably 6 million tonnes, because then the additional hydrogen production is the additive 2 million tonnes.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions online, Diane?
Yes, we do. Thank you. Diana Taylor, Martin Humber. We've got a number of questions here.
Great.
The one I will upon following Sophie's last presentation. A lot of you have spoken about skills and capability, and we hear a lot about a demand in the future and a shortage for that. Can you please expand on whether you feel this shortage is significant for this industry, and how do we reach out to more people like Sophie so that we can create the talent and capability that we need in the region?
So I'm going to look at our panel here. Perhaps I can direct it to Clark. Clark, you spoke quite a bit about skills and what we need to address that. Clark, would you like to take that question first of all?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to take that one. So there are three areas for me where we get skills. So the first one for me is we've got skills from other industries. Where we have, we've seen during a pandemic, we've seen maybe if you're working in an industry that's in an opposite transition, such as oil and gas, for example, then you might be looking for opportunities in our industry. And I think it's incumbent on us to make sure that we have a visibility of what we can offer as an industry to those other industries, and that means working with partner organisations which help it. And the second one for me is making sure, as I said earlier, that people from all areas of society and all skills of society can understand there's a place in our industry. You don't have to be a climate change activist. You don't have to be an engineer, as you said. I think, Sophie, that's an excellent example of where you've got either a passion or where you've got an interest. We need all sorts of skills in our industry. So we need to get the message out that there is a range of jobs with our industry. And then the third thing is, I would like to see us starting at the grassroots level in schools and making sure that we get that same message over into schools. And also, it's not just the diversity I talked about, so it's the likes of the STEM, but also trying to get over the range of opportunities that are available in our industry, so that if you are scared by a particular subject or style, or you don't want to be a leader of people, or you don't want to do something too technical, or you want to do something that's slightly different, then you can find your place in our industry. And we do a lot of work with schools to try and get them comfortable with people who work in our industry so they can see the opportunities there. So I think that they're my three main drivers.
Thank you very much. That was a great response. Does anybody have anything to add to that, Ruth?
Yeah, I think it's also important that we look at sort of the whole picture and the skills needed for the whole region. So there has been work on looking at skills for carbon capture and storage and utilisation, and that's been sort of taking the model, looking at models in other sectors like nuclear and building on what's already happening in the oil and gas sector and other industries, and saying, well, so what models have worked in other sectors for kind of drawing people into these industries? And actually, I think a lot of the skills, we need to be looking cross-discipline, and a lot of the skills are at the interface between, say, what people are doing in offshore wind, what people are doing in oil and gas, and actually bringing those together for something like green hydrogen or blue hydrogen and green hydrogen, similar skills side by side. So I think there's a need to just sort of work together across the different sectors in this space and look at skills as broadly as possible on a regional basis. So I think that's been really useful, looking at the nuclear example, looking at CCOS, looking at offshore wind, and then maybe kind of looking across the three of those as to what a particular region needs.
Yeah, that's a really good response. I mean, the UK has led the way with the Industrial Revolution, and we've learned so many lessons about the development of technologies and industries in the past. We just need to bring those lessons all together as quickly as possible for the energy transition, for the new energy transition. Do we have any more questions from the room?
Thank you. My name is Azoka Victor. I'm an energy engineering MSc student at the University of Hull. So my question is on carbon capture and storage. This carbon that is captured and stored, isn't there the possibility of leakage in this stored carbon? And if there is, what modalities have been put in place to tackle this if it should happen? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So what I guess might be helpful if you sort of remember Dave's presentation is that when the CO2 is captured, it's compressed into a liquid, it's then transported, often kind of to around quite sort of depths under the ocean, so kind of 800 meters, maybe 1,000 meters under below ground level, and so it's sort of beneath the seabed, right? So and down there, it's very pressurized. So it goes in there, and the rocks that it goes into a formation where there'll be a rock all enclosing it, and that rock is, think of it like a sponge. So when this liquid goes down pressurized, that sponge sucks that CO2 into it, and over time that CO2 just gets deeper and deeper into the rock and actually becomes part of the rock. And this is in a way where we got sort of our oil from originally, right? We extracted it out of rocks and little porous holes in rocks where and we had to apply immense sort of pressure to get the stuff out of there. And what we're doing is basically reversing that process and putting it really back where nature had it perfectly stored for millions of years originally. And that's in a depleted oil and gas field. But the same process applies for what we call an aquifer formation, where it's more of a cavern where there is also salt water. But again, the rocks within that do absorb the CO2 and it becomes part of the geological formation. So, you know, it will be down there for thousands and thousands and millions of years. Obviously, if Humber was on a fault line and you have lots of earthquakes and volcanoes, then you might be a bit more worried and you might have, you know, be a bit more carefully select your site. But, you know, you've got perfectly good rock formations that are very solid and no chance of those breaking at all. It's part of the seabed. Regardless of that, though, obviously we do need to make sure we know where that CO2 is at all times. It's absolutely essential to being able to prove that that CO2 stays down there. So there is monitoring, and there is under the sort of, you talked about the storage permit that has been recently awarded to the harbour site. Part of that legislation, which is something I was involved in designing, ensures that there is a monitoring system that can account for the location of all the CO2 put down there for a very, very long time. So for the duration of that storage permit, and these are decades. So we'll be monitoring that because it does travel in that sort of rock formation and it moves and then it becomes part of the rock. So but you'll be able to monitor that. You can see very clearly. They've been doing it in Norway for sort of decades now in a site called Sleipner in the North Sea. And that is actually an aquifer site, so it's got some salt water in there, as well as the rock formation that they're injecting into. And they've been able to actually see if you like, the CO2 as it moves and track it over time. And you can see how it's just further and further spread into the rock over time. And that's been going for about 20 years. So we've got reasonably good confidence from a geological perspective that, you know, this stuff, once it's down there, it stays down there and you can easily monitor it over time.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ruth, and thank you for your question. I think that is the sort of question that reflects what a lot of people think about carbon capture. Isn't it going to leak? And, you know, key points from what Ruth said there, that the oil and gas that were down there in the first place didn't leak. These storage reservoirs have got a very high integrity. And it's also a great story for the oil and gas industry, which have, of course, extracted the hydrocarbons in the first place. They are the experts in managing these reservoirs. So it's a repurposing of that industry effectively for carbon capture and storage. Any more questions from the room?
Hello, I'm Joe Atwood from Axiom Sustainability. Thank you all this morning. I thought it was brilliant, really exciting, the topics that you're covering, and great to get to know more about it. I just wonder if you look sort of I don't know, 5 generations ahead, where do you see sort of carbon capture and storage? Because I can see it as a sort of interim as we move to this greener world. What do you think the long-term future is for that sort of sector?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very broad, actually, collection of capabilities, carbon capture, utilisation and storage, because we haven't really talked about utilisation either, in the sense that there are, and it's not going to be as large, I think, as the storage that we put under the seabed, but there are materials that we can create, sort of building materials, things like that, that permanently sequester the carbon within them as well. So that is another way of taking carbon out of the atmosphere and having it locked into products that we use that are long duration products. So I think there are many, many applications that are still coming forward and still being designed. So to try to look 50 years ahead and say, well, will we still be putting most of what we capture under the seabed, or will we be doing something else with it? I couldn't tell you. But that ability to capture that CO2, I think, not to say that I'm a pessimist, but if we think now that we need to decarbonise 78% by 2035 in the UK, what else has got to happen around the world? If we think that by 2050 we'll have done it and we can all just sit back and, I'm not sure about that. So whilst we may, as you say, have transformed many other aspects of the way we live so that we don't use or release as much carbon, I suspect we might still be needing to take carbon out of the atmosphere anyway, because we are still dealing with hundreds of years of anthropogenic, warming. So it's, this acceleration, as it's like driving, looking through the rear view mirror, not seeing what's ahead of you. We only can tell kind of how much the planet's warmed, maybe like 10 years. We're looking back now at how much warming we've got, and we're measuring, and climate scientists are telling us, well, this is what it looks like now, but we're only going to see the effects of now maybe in another so many decades. So by 2050, if someone said to me at 2050, we don't need to keep taking carbon dioxide directly out of the air and storing it somewhere, I'd be really surprised. But I would hope, like you, from an optimistic side, that we would have removed as much CO2 out of our materials and things as of the production materials as possible, sequestered as much of it as possible in the materials we're using permanently, and reduced hopefully the amount we need to store. But I'm not sure, to be honest. I don't think anyone can really see too far ahead. And I also think that whilst we know we've got quite a lot of storage in the UK, I said earlier, 70% of Europe's storage. So maybe after we've totally decarbonised the UK, we'll still be storing CO2 from other places. And people are looking at shipping CO2 from areas where they don't have natural good rock formations for storage sites. So I think this would carry on quite a long time, maybe after the whole of the East Coast is net zero. We might still be doing this to help others. So I don't think at all that it's a short-term capability. I think it will be very much needed into, for many, many, many decades.
Yeah, that was a great response. I think it's one of the more accessible technologies that we have now to address emissions now or next 5 years or so for actually getting deployment of CCS. But yes, there's a lot more to come long term, I think, and I think we've explained that very well, to do with the direct air capture, taking the CO2 out of the air. And net zero is inherently there may still be some residual emissions from some industries or from some locations. You might want to offset that with direct air capture, and there's a role for CCS going forwards, 50 years into the future potentially. Online question.
Can you please expand on
how potential suppliers of technology, including from abroad, could most easily explore the opportunities and potentially plug in to the cluster here in the Humber?
So I'm going to offer that to Emma or to Clark.
I can try.
Go for it, Emma.
I mean, I don't know if I'll be able to. I can understand that question. It's, you know, companies that want to get engaged with this opportunity in the future, and I think, you know, I get associated, for instance, with the Gigastat Project, and I get lots of companies saying, "Please, you know, this is what we can do for you." Things. I think I'll answer it from a renewable point of view, and you can do the CCS blue hydrogen point of view. I think with green hydrogen, it's quite early in, like, the Gigastat project we've done. That's quite a feed study, a front end engineering design study, so it's quite early. And then, like, our other project Oyster earlier again, and things like that. So I think, well, my message at the moment is it's quite immature and we're learning, but I do think there's quite a lot of forums that you can kind of get plugged into, like I've seen with a lot of companies in the local area around the offshore wind opportunity, to kind of at least be informed as things develop and grow from here. So maybe this is, again, another thought to put out there. So when I look at things like the cluster plan that's happening in the Humber at the moment, ISCF project, and you've got brilliant sort of business networks like Catch, well, they're also a trade, they do everything, don't they? But I think this is the thing, get engaged with some of these networks, forums. So, for instance, in the offshore wind side of life, it's organisations like Marketing Humber, but it's also particularly Team Humber Marine Alliance or Grids Renewables Partnership, and that's sort of like a forum for local businesses to come, you know, organising that. You know, the higher tier companies are sort of informing further down the tiers, and there's a good exchange of information and knowledge of what's going to be coming up. And I think that's the sort of thing that can happen in this space, though, as I say, with green hydrogen, it's a bit early, still working quite a lot out yet to know what we're going to want to buy in the future. But to get engaged with those forums, see how the landscape is, how it's growing, how it's developing, and, you know, yeah, just really getting engaged with it all. And I think, yeah, I'm not particularly promoting any specific organisations, but I do think Catch is a really good local organisation that's in the heart of a lot of this work at the moment.
Yeah, I totally agree, Emma, and that the you know, the Humber Industrial Cluster Plan is looking at the supply chain element of this overall, you know, energy transition, and how best to basically take all these projects forward whilst engaging and upskilling, you know, locally, local technology, local education, and local suppliers. So yeah, I think it's definitely the place to be, to get engagement from.
Yeah. And Clark, did you have anything to add on that one?
Just what I would add with it was I can see an evolution of how we use areas such as the Humber. So the first thing we did was we used the fact that there was the river and the port, and we looked at bringing in manufacturing, or now we're looking at fabrication. So you've kind of got a base one. The second one, I think, builds on what we've just discussed, which is how you can then use the skills. So whether that's a vessel skill, whether that's a container skill, whether that's a transfer of fluid skills, the various skills of treating substances that we've got in Humber. And then I think the final one is the services. So one of the technological advantages or advancements that we made that bring an advantage to the Humber is where we've looked at the O&M. So Emma talked about being based in Grimsby, and you've got Herbert based in Grimsby, you've got RWE based in Grimsby. And there's a lot of technology in terms of taking data from turbines, looking at upgrades of turbines, looking at how we keep the grid systems going, how we reuse it if we do repowering, the drone solutions we talked about, robotic solutions to replace anything. So there's a lot of technology when we have a cluster of wind farms, whether they be producing electricity or hydrogen, that we can benefit from, and then we can attract inward investment, I think, into those areas.
That's great. Thank you, Clark. So message is really get stuck in, get involved. There's plenty of opportunities. So I think that's all that we've got time for today, and we're going to have to wrap up there. If you did have any burning questions from within the room, then I think there will be around. So, grab one of us and we can talk about it for much longer. Any of the online questions, if we've got online questions that we haven't addressed, so perhaps, I'm giving Diane something here to do probably, but perhaps she can circulate them around the panel and then we can respond to them, by email or whatever it is, or a post. We'll work out a way to answer your questions. Thank you very much for your engagement. Thank you for listening. Thanks again to the panel of speakers online and in person here. The Waterline Summit is going on all week. Please do join us for the rest of our sessions today. Our next event is a webinar, Joining the Dots for a Sustainable Future, and there's a host of fringe events this afternoon. And of course, then tomorrow is Clean Road Transport Day. Please check it out, and we look forward to seeing you again.